I promised Laura that I wouldn't break into song. But thank you all for coming this evening and braving the cold. We've been very excited about hosting this book launch because we really appreciate the value of getting these books into the hands of the kids in our after-school programs. And so while we look forward to talking about the 10, and I always get this wrong, so you're going to have to correct me, the 10 inventors, the 10 artists, and the 10 leaders. Yes, there we go. We as Outliers would like to acknowledge 10 women who've shaped us as an organization over the years. Laura and I started Outliers in 2014, but we've been doing this since before that.
True story.
And Alison has been with us before we even did Outliers. So Alison, would you like to come up, please, and join us? And then we've got Mama Numa, Mama Lungi, and Zuki. Come, please. These women have been with us since before we founded Outliers and have really shaped us into who we are today and how we respond to what children need in communities. Unfortunately, Zaleka hasn't arrived yet, and Lindy from Tokozani Together is not feeling well, so she won't be joining us. And then there are 3 other random women of color who also help shape Outliers, and they're a little bit embarrassed to be up here this evening because it's me, Janine, and Laura. I'll claim the scientist. Janine, I'm creative, and Laura, what are you?
I do.
So we've, as you know, as part of this book launch, we've raised funds to cover the books to get to our programs, and so we're very happy to give you each a copy of the 3 books for your after-school program. And then we've also, Jeanette, would you like to just wave at us from over there? Jeanette and Jackie are from Micklefield Junior School, and they have partnered with us for many years. Norma picked up furniture from Micklefield, we've got books from them, we've hosted events at Micklefield, and so they've also given us a copy. They had Sugar visit them, and then we kept 10 copies for Outliers, so you also get a copy of Sugar book from Micklefield. Thanks for being here this evening. Alison.
Okay, I don't actually need the mic, but my relationship, or our relationship of our organization with Lourdes and Heidi spans over 17 years. I sat and thought about it.
Oh, wow.
So I know them from another organization. And tonight, when she asked me to say something, I thought, like I said, 1 minute, but I'll take the 3. Because I thought about it, you know, and they belong to another organization before, so I'm not mentioning names in case there's somebody in the audience, but I make no apologies for what I'm going to say. So I remember when I started Rainbow Hope, the organization came to me and said to me, this is what we offer, and I kept on saying to her, but I don't need that. What else do you have to offer? And she could never tell me they had a fee attached to joining that organization. And I would say to her, you need to pay me that fee because I can bring so much more to the table than what you're prepared to give me. And I think that's where I came to know those 2 ladies as well. And I've looked over the years, Laura and Heidi, and I know Janine's not with you that long. So I've seen the fairness with which you treat us and everybody that have started their after-school program. Always fair in saying, ladies, there's books that you can take, please see that everybody gets, you know. I've looked at the respect with which you treat us, you know. Never like in any way making you feel small or little, doesn't matter where you came from. And then I saw them taking responsibility for stuff that government should have taken responsibility for. But they stood in the gap, and not only with education. I remember going to a program where you were doing that housing and gentrification. stop capable of that. And they stepped into that gap, not only with education, you know, and then the integrity with which they operate the organization, and the love with which I can just hear Lorna and Heidi when they send an email, I can actually hear them when they send that email. And I believe with all my heart that because you have that first 5 right, your service comes naturally. And so that for me is who you are. And I feel that the 3 of you should be here up front. And we should be honoring you tonight. So that's what I think our relationship has always been a partnership. It's not only what they can do for us, but what we can do for them as well. You know, how can we help them help other organizations? And for me, that's been the pivot of our relationship. So I want to thank you. I've seen our organization grow. You've seen them grow. We even run our own homeschool and we're a children's home. And it's all, Laura was there to come and help us set up and help us with programs and things. And I've seen you grow from young ladies into these women. And yeah, I can only say I never made a bad choice when I decided to come to Outliers and join you than the other organization. Thank you.
Give Logie the mic.
Okay, thank you. I don't have much to say, but just to thank Outliers for being there for us when we needed them. And they helped us a lot. And they helped us. There is that song say, be bright in the corner where you are. So they helped us to be bright in our corner. So I think what is needed in this country now is that we all need to be bright in the corner where we are, because there is a lot happening, especially in young people and children. So we thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies. We'll chat some more later. I'm going to hand over to Thandi, Athambile, and Xolisa.
My name is Thandi Gamedze and it's not on. Okay. Yeah. My name is Thandi Gamedze and I feel very honored to be hosting this conversation tonight. Thank you all for being here. It's really powerful, I think, not only what these books have done by representing women and putting women front and center, but how it's also, I guess, facilitated this event where we have these incredible women who are doing really important work today. And now I get to speak to the authors of this incredible book series that we are here to talk about today. So welcome Athambile and Xolisa. It's a real privilege to chat to you today. So we really want this to be a conversation and to be participatory. We're going to ask that, if possible, hold your questions to the end, and we're going to create some space for engagement at the end. If there's something really urgent that you would like to ask as we're having the conversation, then feel free to put up your hand and we'll come to you, but I know that there's some really incredible women and people in this space doing really great work. So we want to make space for some conversation around that as well. But I'd like this first question to give the people in this room a sense of who you are. So you've written about these women who have played really important and varied roles in our history. So you also are the women who are playing really important roles in our present. So how would you want to tell your own stories, to share a little bit about who you are today? Xolisa, I see the mic is being passed.
Very subtle.
I'm indicating to her to start, for her to start, and Athambile is not starting. Good evening. Goeienaand. Molweni. My name is Xolisa Guzula. I work at UCT and I lecture in education, in language and literacy studies. But I don't start from I start from the village where I grew up in the Eastern Cape. I often think about my village as a village that has been forgotten, that is hard to get to if you leave Cape Town and you have to get home because the roads are so bad that you are even worried about having a car accident. And so I'm thinking about how far it is and how hidden, and how when I grew up there, I didn't know that I would be here today. I was just a rural child growing up, but I had women in my life, and so I often think about, because we're talking about women now, my success and the things that I've done, there's always a woman behind them. And it's either a woman that collaborates with me, or a woman who raised me, or who valued something that I do. And my story begins with my grandmother, who taught me how to write when she couldn't write herself, and who taught me how to read when she couldn't read herself. She valued education, but when my mother left the Eastern Cape and I needed to keep communication with my grandparents, who never set foot in school, my grandmother made me read those letters and made me write those letters that she wrote to my mother in Imbokodo province for 7 years, every month, going to the post office, signing letters, posting letters, receiving orders in the post office, and I'm sure the people in the post office were like, who's this child? Always with this old woman, So I think that's where I traced my writing journey and my reading journey. And because of that, loving to write and loving to read, I was often spared of having to do the hard chores of fetching water or of going to the river to wash, as I look at Vulisano's art of going to the river to wash the laundry. I was often spared of that because my grandmother would say, Xolisa is reading. And so, So anyway, I am passionate about language and literacy and community work. So I was telling Thandi, for a long time, before I came to UCT to become a lecturer, my work began in communities. Already here in Cape Town in 2006, we saw the need to start the Vulindlela Reading Club, which we named after Brenda Fassie's song Vulindlela. And we encourage reading in our children every Saturday, whether it was raining or shining, we were always there reading with children, and they taught us a lot about what I know now, that I'm able to teach teachers about. It is the children of Langa who taught me, but also the women who work with me in the community who cared about the children when we feel like our departments are not doing enough for our children. It is the women who stand up and say, let's do something, let's do something. So, and every time there's a gap, another woman comes and says, let's do something. And I think Athambile also said that when we started to think about these books that we are writing, she said, Xoli, there's a gap. let's do something. And that's how we got here.
Wow, thanks, Tony. Molweni. Good evening. Goeienaand. Yeah, I'm so moved. Oh, sorry, this is so loud. Put it over there. I'm so moved by this event and just the journey of this book. And I think, yeah, when the question that you're asking about my story, my story is about women, I guess, and that's why I gravitate towards women's stories. I come from a very matriarchal home. My grandmother, Bele. I'm the youngest of 3 sisters. My mother has 3 sisters. 3. I went to a girls' school. My life is very matriarchal. So I guess that's the story you would kind of tell about my life. And to what Xolisa is saying, is like women have taught me how to build. Women are builders. And women are doers, but also I've just been really held, and like women are also healers for me. And the community of women that have really surrounded me has been amazing. So yeah, my story is intricately linked to women. I do have men in my life, I mustn't shame. Yeah, I think that's another conversation, but and I'll say that because I think we are in this context. A lot of people ask, we're about the books for boys, and I think boys must learn something from women. And I think that's why we need to keep writing. And well, that's how you write these stories, so that, boys must learn something from women about holding space, about building community, about being open and being vulnerable. And I think the story for me with writing, I went to a school that it was such a strange school in that like writing was always there. It was something that we all did, and we were all made to believe we did it well. From some A, we all believed we were great writers. I don't know how, not so much great writers, but it was just so in our lives. Like our writing would be posted on the walls. It was the school magazine. It was something I took for granted. It was only much later I was like, oh, I can do this as a job. It's not just like something that you just do in your life. Not that I do it as a job, but like it's something that I want to do. So that's been a really exciting part about this journey, that it was something that writing doesn't come easy, but insofar as the stories, being able to identify the stories, and the stories are always just right there. I love eavesdropping, and that's where I find a lot of stories. And being like Twekai and Dwebile, I was very here with the chat, so also just being that kind of person. My family encouraged me to be that person. So yeah, I think that's how I would tell my story.
Beautiful.
Did you want a title? Because we kind of just gave you our life stories.
If you have a title.
No. I'm just curious.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. I think all of us are very grateful that both of you have been shaped by who you've been shaped by, and into writers who have produced not only these books, by the way. Check out all the other things that they have written. They're award-winning, by the way, both of them. So let's not forget that. So as you probably know, there's 3 different books in the series, and in the introduction to the one which is about singers, writers, and artists, there's a quote that says, "Fighting colonialism and apartheid involved more than protesting on the streets." So, and Xolisa, we were chatting a little bit about this earlier, but what is the role and the importance of artists in society today? Because I think often those stories get marginalized as well. And what are some of the barriers that these people face in that pursuit? Shall we start with you, Athambile?
Yeah, so I think it was last year or 2020, and this really amazing album came out, Indaba Is, and it was like a lockdown album. It had Thandi, Brother Moves On, give me names, Thandi, Brother Moves On, Bongani Daya, like all the cool kids of jazz basically in South Africa. And they had a launch. I'm going to get to your question because I'm getting to something that Thandi said at the launch. They had a launch to this album. It's a beautiful album, beautiful album. It's like one of those albums. I think because it came out in lockdown. It was like church for me because we couldn't go to church, and it was just like I could play it on repeat. And that's what arts does actually. And that for me was like just embodying that. But one of the things that Thandi said at the launch, they had launched at the Forge. And Thandi said, and she was talking about what had happened with the picketing of artists outside, was it DAC or National Arts Council, when artists were just bereft and the state wasn't doing anything. And she said, the ANC, in this case, she was talking directly about ANC, and I'm paraphrasing, but she was like, the ANC knows exactly what artists can do because they did it themselves. They used it. So she's like, I would disempower me too if I knew what they knew about what the arts can do. And I think that's why we wanted a book about artists and singers, because it's not a byproduct. And I can't remember if it was Nogavazi's thing on Facebook more recently, but there was this eloquent quote that someone put up: the arts and music education are not a byproduct, they're the very core. I was thinking a friend of mine actually bemoaning, again, with all the problems that I had in school, one of the things we both loved, she went to another girls' school and I was at a different one, we were just comparing notes. We used to, on Wednesdays, we used to have arts and crafts, so school would stop at second break and the rest of the day is arts and crafts. And like there would just like literally be a hum in the school, just like it's quiet, people are painting or people are doing something with their hands, and it was before earphones, so in one or other two classes there'd be like someone would bring CDs and all this into music, we're doing candle wicking and all of that. And there was like a hum that would sit in the school and it was just quiet. And there was just something about remembering those quiet moments in our school, and they make time for us to just express ourselves artistically and what it did for us. Choral singing. I mean, I was in the choir for all 12 years of my life, and how that does, like, I think music does something at a cellular level. Like when you sing collectively, it does something to the body. So I'm a huge fan of just, it's not a thing. It's the very core of who we are. And when you disempower artists, you disempower a nation. And that's why I think that's actually my favorite book at the moment of the three.
Cool. Beautiful. You speak about your school, Arta, as a school that created space for art, and my coming into art is coming because I was deprived of art in terms of other art forms. Of course, music was always there as the one art form, but if you talk about visual arts, that is not something that I had in schooling, or that in fact teachers would often see us drawing, but they would take the drawings and put them in the bin because that wasn't serious work. Serious work had to do with writing, right? So you have to write, you have to do your sums, and they didn't give us enough time to explore other ways of making meaning, of making sense of our world. And so I also sang. I sang in the choir, church choir. Actually, we write about women who went to church and the role of church. I mean, it's there in these books. We went to church, we sang in church, and that was often the thing that kept us children in church. It was the song, not maybe somebody preaching, but it was the music. To be honest, it was the music. And if there wasn't those good singers in the church that day, you feel like, oh my goodness, I didn't have the thing, you know. So music was there. Music was always there also as young children growing up and singing, us having music books, singing along with artists who sang on radio. This radio was available for us in rural areas. And we would transcribe the lyrics and write them into our notebooks. And we were learning English. And so the lyrics were there to teach us English and fluency in reading English. So it was, my fluency came from singing and writing down the lyrics of songs. But then you could actually see that the school is not geared artistically or helping those school children who are artists to excel. Something starts with preparing for the competition, and then it stops. there's no carrying on with the work. And so for me, I felt like, no, man, there's something that we were deprived. I could have been better at some. To wash clothes, and then would find clay and make things out of clay, but we didn't think that it was valuable enough that you could become the artist in the thing, in pottery, for example. So because the school was so far removed from what people do in their daily life and tended to discard what people do in the community, then the school narrowed down what we could learn and know as knowledge. So now coming to this project and saying, okay, art is important, and also in my work now in literacy, it's not just the written words, it is also the art that children make, the stories that they tell through their drawings, the stories that they tell through their collages, the stories that they tell through the photographs that they put together, the visual arts. It's so part of the language and literacy learning. It is not something that is on the side that teachers can say, let them fill in missing words. After that, when they are done with their filling in of missing words, then they can draw. This is how teachers do this in school. Art, they never consider it as a core element of our being, that it needs to be done in school. So I feel like the children, many of our children, many of them are in schools of skills today because they didn't succeed to read and write. Now, it's only now people are thinking, we should have offered them an alternative, and they're only realizing much later when the children have given up on their talents, when they've internalized failure already. So by focusing, in fact this book, we dedicate it to the artist children in our schools because we want them to follow their hearts and do what their hearts direct them to do. And instead of us adults telling them that become a doctor and not be an artist. Let's allow our children to be. So artists for us are very much important. Their work is so important. It is healing. We've just had the hardest time of COVID-19. We needed music. We needed to go into the arts in its various forms. Even in written books, you go to the book and you read something. It got yourself healed in some way from loneliness. You miss somebody, you couldn't be with them during COVID, you go to music. You can't go to church, you listen to church music. So it's a lot that is part of us. We can't separate it from the things that we do daily in our schooling. So that's why for us artists are so important. And we feel sad that their work is not seen as professional work. It is still not seen as professional work because as professionals, we continue to even earn salaries when we had COVID and shutdowns, but the artists couldn't earn salaries in that time, and they struggled a lot.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I hope that these books will encourage people to take up that role in society, as many of these women have done. So earlier today, we were privileged to meet some of the women who have been running after-school programs and been part of Outliers. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing in your communities. So having been introduced to these women tonight, what are some of the connections that you see between those stories and the stories of the women that you have been digging up and writing about in these books? Chloe, do you want to start? Oh.
There is so much of a connection because I don't think that the women we write about knew that we would write about them now. So you are doing the work that you are doing, but you don't know someone's going to write about you one day. And actually that somebody is watching what you do, and somebody is following your story. And so the connection is, for me, working to build the community. Often when there are troubles, I mean, we talk about after-school programs. You work in after-school programs because the school isn't doing its job well, such that we have to intervene and form these after-school programs to help our children, because we see there's a gap there. So, like I said earlier, women also always step in. So, even in colonial times, when there were hardships in life, when people were experiencing hard life, couldn't get jobs, were hungry, couldn't get medication, we found, I mean, there were women like Rondebosch building a makeshift hospital in her township in Babeja, so that people can have access to medication. She was one of the earlier nurses. She's in the book. You know, Cecilia Makiwane was one of the earlier nurses, and Dora Nginza was also one of the earlier nurses. Dora built a makeshift hospital in her own house so that people who were ill with typhoid, she could help them. So that thing of people stepping up as well, it's women who see there's need and let me help now. And there's also women who saw that the education that was given to black children wasn't good enough in the time. And so they built schools. I mean, Charlotte McLagan today is turning 151 years old, and Google showed it. And Charlotte was the first woman to get a BSc degree from Wilberforce University. And when she arrived back in after getting her degree in 1901, the first thing she did was to convert people to Christianity, and also starting schools, night schools, so that the boys who were headmen could go to school in the evening, but also she had to talk to the kings about the value of education and needing. I mean, she was clever in converting the kings first so that they then can have their followers as well converted, and giving them a good education and working in different spaces to give quality education. We have Onobutela Dube, who built churches and schools with her husband to make sure that the children were given the education that they needed, you know, the vocational education that they couldn't have at the time. And so that's how they started Thandi Institute. We have also Sisiwe Makanya, who did community work and who were social workers, you know, in KZN, who did work in the community, helping people in the community. And so most times when we see people going to offices, because leaving the community, going to another office somewhere at UCT, maybe where I work, we think that that's a cool thing to do, because you leave your community of Langa or Guletu or Manenberg. You leave and go to the mountain and work there. But I think that the real work is the one that we do in our own community, rather than abdicating them, staying in those communities, making sure we uplift each other. And I think this is the work that women like you are doing in your communities. And it's extraordinary work for me. So I know because of having, I think in 2013 and 2014, I went to work in the villages in the Eastern Cape, in the rural villages with schools. And that was the work that was like a calling to my heart. And the work that I did in the townships as well, getting to the township and saying, you know what, we can have this, we can talk about education being bad, but if we don't do anything ourselves, then nothing is going to improve. So we have these women like me, like you, who say, let's do something. If we don't do anything, no one will do it. So I think that that connection for me is very strong.
So good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you covered all the women who did community work, but with that, it's also how they collaborated. So a lot of these women were friends. And I think, I mean, now with this kind of me, selfie, influencer vibe or culture that we have, I think, gosh, I might sound so old, but like it's, it's, you know, these young people. But we really take for granted how important working in community with other people is, you know, that not one of these Omama came to stand here alone, that they all stood here alone, and they all stood here together. So we try to express that in our book. I mean, the three Magdalena sisters, we wanted all three of them to be there because they were sisters and they were doing something phenomenal together, even if they were in different sort of different professions. Mina Soga was friends with Shadat Mateke. And so showing women in community with each other, Lily and Chabalala knew each other. One of the books actually up there, the Josie Bama book, worked together with Lily and Chabalala, who's in our book. So they were constantly, and I think that's something that we take for granted, that there were constantly movements. So this idea of like, get up and do it yourself. If this organization didn't work out, they started another one. If that one didn't work out, they started another one. And they bickered and they fought and there was strife, but they started something else. And there was that willingness to constantly do the work. And I think that's maybe something we partly also why we included, because we don't talk about social workers anymore. I don't know. In my context, a lot of people don't. And I've met like real life social workers, and like they're doing phenomenal work. So I mean, it could have been easy. We could have, you know, featured I don't know, doctors maybe, I don't know, pediatricians, but featuring teachers and social workers was so important for us because those are two professions that are still the lifeblood of what we're doing right now, even though we take them for granted. And I think it is quite fun. People are kind of confused as to why we included social workers in our books, like who wants to be a social worker or who wants to be a community worker. It's just, and for us to also just represent them in such a beautiful way was so important for us. And even someone as eclectic like Mabel Qetu, who was a photographer, but was also a socialite, but was also involved in women's movements, and a midwife. So there's also this range that women can do. You know, women aren't just one thing. And I think we've seen all those examples in our own lives, but especially with the work that all women are doing as well.
I love that, and I think that's one of the things that I found most exciting and life-giving about the books, because often I think with biographies of, you know, these kind of heroes of our history, which often are these men who've been singled out, it's about one person, and yet you've got these books that are a range of these women, and saying that it's actually a collective, there's a team, and even in the way that you've shared in your own stories, there's always been this team of women, and I love how that's reflected so beautifully in the books. So we have touched on churches a few times in this conversation already, and of course we are in a church right now, and I think in the stories that I've read in the books, in many of them, the church has been an important formational space for these women and has been played quite a central role in some of their work. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit, and in that maybe think about what role the church could or should be playing in society today.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the women, of course, we start with women in the 1800s. So the two of the women, Emma Sandile and Paulina Dlamini, and they both just have such an interesting relationship with the church. Especially, I'm going to speak about Emma Sandile, particularly because her story is related to Cape Town. So Zonneblom College, she was one of the young people who were brought to Zonneblom College because her father, King Sandile, was on Robben Island or had been arrested arrested. And so there's frontier wars happening in the Cape, what we now call the Eastern Cape. And so they take, so George Grey and Bishop Grey here in Cape Town have this brilliant idea: let's take the children of the chiefs and enculturate them and make them subjects of the Anglican Church and make them subjects of the British Crown so that we can influence them, basically, classic colonial story. And so Emma Sandile and her brother Gonya and Hester Ngeke and another child of Chief Makoma, I think, end up here in Cape Town, far away from their family. And so there's this tension. We try to include, I think, the letters that she would write, trying to get home. So she would write to Bishop Grey, she would write to Sir George Grey, and just be like, I just want to go home, I just want to see my family. And in fact, we even struggled finding pictures of her. So there's a cover of a book about Zona College written by Janet Hodgson and Teresa Edelman. And on the cover is a beautiful picture of these young men who would have been Emma Sandile's peers, and there are no pictures of the young woman. So again, that sense of that story of, even because if you were visible in the colonial record, then you should be in pictures like that, but she disappears. But what she's able to do to insert herself is to write those letters. So her story is so significant, but also her relationship with the church changes over time. So none of her children, she doesn't raise any of her children as Christian because of what the church then does to her. So there's this bitterness because of what the church does. They kind of really try to control her life in a strange way. And it's this tension of the church has given her this ability to speak for herself, but at the same time really control her life. So the church was, because she was an Anglican subject, they wanted to control who she married. And there was this huge drama, you can read about it in the book, about who she marries and why she doesn't marry this person. And there's a whole lot of drama, but it was so interesting that there are all these records about her peers then saying she's left the church because of this bitterness. So for me, that tension, and I think a lot of people have that experience right now of the church leaving a very bitter taste in their mouth because they speak left and talk right. And so that's a very interesting story. I mean, many of the other women, and Xolisa's already mentioned Charlotte McLeod, but what was also interesting for me with Charlotte McLeod, what she does is there's this element of subverting the church. So the Methodist Church in South Africa this is like late 1800s, is going through a thing. They don't want to give black clergymen space. They've just been problematic white people. And so a few of them leave, and they start there's a huge movement of independent churches kind of leaving the mission stations and just wanting to start their own churches. And so I think her uncle starts writing to her. She's at Wilberforce, starts writing to her. And the AME Church in America, she connects them with her uncle who are starting this independent church. So we don't talk about her as being like a founder of the church, but if Charlotte McLeod hadn't gone overseas, the AME Church in South Africa wouldn't have existed. And so there's like this very Africanized version of the Methodist Church. I mean, wear these hats that kind of look like animal skin, and they wear black and white uniform. Actually, I've got a little badge because it's her birthday. I thought I'd wear a pin. So they gave me this pin because they were commemorating her last year, and this is, they still call themselves the Women's Missionary Society. It was the 19th Episcopal District in Soweto. But just that image of like taking something that is not working for you in the sense of like the Methodist missionaries here and subverting it and making it work for you and making Christianity reflect your story and reflect your pain and reflecting and using it then to talk back to the people who are using it against you. So if the Methodist Church was like, oh no, you guys can't be clergy because you're black or whatever it is that they were saying, they then take something else and like, actually, this Bible, the story of the Israelites is also our story. This is how you get Amasiraeli. The story of the people that you are oppressing is our story. And so we're going to use the very tool that you have given us to talk right back at you. And for me, that's powerful. I mean, there's Paulina Dlamini who does the exact same thing. And hers is very interesting because Paulina Dlamini sees life before the Zulu Wars and sees life afterwards. And she uses the church as an unmarried woman to be able to navigate, to be able to get land, to be able to make her own life because for whatever reason she chooses not to marry. So it's also interesting how a lot of the women we feature don't marry and kind of find this angle through the church to become independent, to become teachers through the church. So it's always been this tension. So I always kind of chuckle when people make this tension that we have with the church new. It's very much what the church has always been, is that it has this horrible texture of what it meant as the missionaries, but how black people have often women, have taken it and turned it into something that is a tool for themselves and for their own upliftment. And I mean, I grew up in a church where people would say things like, "Oh mama, you diesel, you know, oh mama are the diesel, they're the fuel that keeps this thing going." So I'm curious, you know, I don't know, I mean, I have my own tensions with the church right now. I haven't found a church since I moved here, so I'm going through the exact same thing that, you know, some of these women are going through.
Yeah. I think about, sorry, I wanted to cough into something. So there is, in the books, you'll see a lot of mission stations mentioned. Was it Zulu? So it's Adam's mission, Adam's College mission, and and then you get also the schools like Inanda Seminary School being mentioned a lot, and in fact, a lot of women have had something to do, or they've been students at Inanda Seminary School. And I think about ourselves. I think about me having gone to St. James. It's a Catholic school in the Eastern Cape in Athambile. And before that, I went to St. Augustine's. And how even my grandmother had so much pride in taking me to the church schools, or her children in the village to the church schools, because she saw progress in terms of how the children were succeeding in school and moving forward, you know, like with their education. That's how she justified it. And so I see these successful women who've gone through these church schools, and so I think like there's something good. There's something good about the church. That there's something that they did to get the students to be interested in learning, to be interested in education. But then what happens is how do you use that education that you get, or that guardianship that you get from the church to fight against the oppression? So it's about not being blind to the dark side of the church, but also saying there's a good side that got me somewhere. So how do I then help others to stop whatever it is that was negative about the church for themselves? So that was an interesting thing for me, and I still see that there's pride in those people who went to church schools, but also there's a history in South Africa about the church schools that offered better education compared to apartheid government, because some missionary schools were also against apartheid, and they were fighting apartheid. So the church itself was in its own conflict, wanting to fight against the injustice, but also fighting perhaps halfway, not full on. So it's like halfway through, okay, we will fight, but we'll stop here. So it was also having its own turmoil, and of course it is the structures that are put up by people themselves, and I doubt that in churches there are people who want to make changes. There are people who want to make lots of change, but then the structures that we sometimes stop people from achieving. We were talking about Dr. Desmond Tutu and Dr. Dandala, who were active, clergymen, and who needed that space to show people the way, and sometimes they fought against the hurdles of their own churches in doing the work. So, but then I still think, Thandi, the work that you are doing yourself, about the role of church in community development and in education. I still see it as being so important because I know I've been there, I've been in church schools, and I feel like I was telling you earlier that I got structured in the way that I had to grow up. It was such a structured way, but I can see how that structured way has helped me to become the person that I am today in structuring my own work, the things that I do. Like, I'm not just so haphazard, I kind of plan. I know my due dates, I know when to sit down, I know when to focus, I know when to play. So in that way, I feel like the church has had a lot of influence on me. But then again, the internal conflicts that come when you study further, when you go to university and you learn about religions of the world, and you start saying, oh, there were other religions. I thought we were meant to be Christian only, So you start having more conflict again. So the more you learn, the more you get challenged also from your own socialization. And you're like, oh, the world is like this. So you learn more about the world. And so I think the church has a role in shaping many young children today. We are having lots of problems in the country today, and I think that the church still has a big role. It never stops. That community work never stops, and we thank people who are in churches who are doing so much. We saw during COVID-19 people also opening up church spaces for educating children, who couldn't go to school, and creating spaces for people to gather around as well, even as they have to socially distance. But creating such spaces has been a very important thing. And the issue of Imanyano was also a very important thing, in that women who come to church, Imanyano is what you call unity, Mother's Union. In church, like sometimes when I reflect back and I think, oh, my grandmother used to go to her, Imanyano on a Thursday. It was a regular thing, we knew it, and she couldn't miss it. But also thinking that in a patriarchal world, where women are always stuck at home and always having to take care of children and take care of husbands, it was a space for our grandmothers to go and be by themselves and do their own thing and uplift themselves. And this is where they exercise leadership positions as well in the church, Manyanos, and that is a good memory for me when I think about it.
I really appreciate the nuance, I think, that is captured in the stories that you're telling that are personal to you, but also the books. And I've always liked this, Black theologians used to use this phrase, the church as a site of struggle, to describe the church, and I feel like the tensions that you've highlighted really capture that well. So I think let's make some time for questions if people have. So I know these books have done such amazing work to represent stories that have been marginalized, but of course we have a long way to go to continue this work, and I think, this offers a beautiful pathway into some of that. But we have people represented here from different spaces, educators, academics, community workers, many different people, media. So maybe feel free to ask questions from your own perspective.